Yeah,
My legs are really nasty though from the field work, and they're all just peeling right now. So
No, not-
I really want to
Wait.
make sure nobody sees it because I
Okay.
look like I'm rotting from the foot down.
Yeah, I have the same. Well, a similar problem. I have massive. I play squash, and then like so, my foot is always rubbing against my
Yeah.
shoes, so I have massive bunions, and it's on my toes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like the last field work that I was on in November when we came back from the Accra Quarantine Quarter. Oh man, my feet they needed prayers.
Long boots or hiking shoes?
Long boots, unfortunately.
Yeah, long boots. They're the best in
They're
terms
the
of that,
best
but it
in-
really messes your feet up.
Yes, and I feel like before I made the mistake of going too small with the long boot, and that messed my feet up. And then I went larger, so I went a size larger this time around, and it still messed my feet up. So I was like, "What do you want from me?"
I know. If it's not the tightness, it's just the constant abrasion, like
Yes.
that. Especially when it gets wet.
Yeah, yeah.
Brutal.
And the socks that we were wearing, because they were like, "Oh, just wear comfortable, thick socks," because there's a lot of walking that we've got to do.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that the socks would help, but it's the same thing like the chafing.
Yeah, chafing,
So I
yeah.
found like I had like a lot of blisters on the back of my foot and in between my toes, and it was just
And the most like, it's almost like when I do it, like when I'm in the field and the blisters happen and you kind of walk in all day, at the end of the day, your feet are so fried, right? And it's almost like you're in excruciating pain, but you kind of know you still have to walk back to camp or whatever. So like mentally, you're almost checked out. But then when you sort of sit down for a minute, and then you get back up, it hurts like hell.
it hurts all over again.
Yeah.
That was so in one of the camps, how it was set up, the camping area was a little further downhill, and the kitchen area you had to go walk up like a little tiny hill to get there. And that was the worst because the trails that we were walking on were already very hilly. So 1 minute we'd be going straight, and then you gotta go up an incline that's like this. So to do that, then come back to camp, relax a little bit in your hammock, and then you hear the call for dinner, and you're like, "Damn, I gotta walk back up this hill." You're like, do I want to eat? I could just
I
starve,
Yeah, brutal. Last time we were in a camp somewhere up there, past Apatary. And we just came back so tired, and I was like, they were, I guess, now started cooking at the camp, and I just couldn't wait, and I ended up like, I had a tin sausage, some bread, so I just mashed it up with some like mustard and mayo I had in the thing, and I had like a pack of Cheetos, and I just crushed it up in the sausage and then spread that on the bread, and I was like, I mean, like at the time I was just like, it's food, I just need to eat and go to bed.
That's all you need.
And then I took a video of it, and then the next day I woke up, first of all, feeling like crap from eating it, but then I looked at it and I was like, oh, what's
It's
for
nasty,
you?
right?
Like, I can't believe I ate that.
Yeah, I've come back from the field and just reassessed the culinary inventions that I've made
Yeah.
whilst in there, and I'm like, you were really on a low point, Arianne.
Yeah, but it's so like nice to do it, like because when you're in there, it's like it's just what you need to do.
Yeah, because
That's
you
not
literally just need
the
it for
mission.
energy.
The mission is not
You
to
know,
eat.
exactly,
it's to like
exactly.
get whatever you have to do done. Anyway, sorry. Let me just do a formal introduction just for people that
Yes.
don't know you. Arianne Harris, welcome to the Gyaff. Thank you so much for coming. And just because you're an academic, I don't want to mess up any of your credentials because you guys are the most important to me to have
I'll
on.
swell my head.
Yeah. No, rightfully deserved. Could you just give me just a title of what you do?
So I am a wildlife biologist and a lecturer at the University of Ghana.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
How long you been lecturing for?
So I started part-time as a tutor. So I just did tutorials on courses.
Okay.
And then I transitioned full-time last year. So if we're talking full-time lecturing, about a year now.
Oh, okay. How are you finding it?
It's nice.
Okay.
It's a learning experience every day because I feel like some of the students are within the same age bracket as me.
Yeah.
So it's
20s.
Yeah, the 20s. So there's a lot of boundaries and navigations that comes with that, because it's very easy to slip into the hey buddy, or the peer to peer conversation and peer vibes, right? But it's an interesting dynamic, and I've kind of learned how to manage that, because sometimes the peer to peer is the best way for them to learn. Right? So like the formal, Dr. Harris and sometimes that doesn't work and they just switch off. Especially with this new age generation. They don't relate as much to the formal atmosphere as they do to just a sit down and a Gyaff, basically. And I find that they retain more knowledge that way. So it's really interesting. And I think that's, I'm learning how to find that balance and make sure that it doesn't get lost in that realm of it becoming disrespectful.
Right. I was just going to ask about that. Yeah.
And you still have teaching and the objective carried out within the classroom.
Yeah. It's it's funny you say that, because when I went to college, I found that they did that well in the U.S. It felt like we would, and I went to a liberal arts school, which is quite small. Yeah. It's not like these big conference rooms of hundreds of kids, so it's very intimate, and the teacher's like in the group, but leading the discussion. Yeah. There's this line of respect that's maintained, but you're still, they encourage you to sort of be open and be curious.
Exactly.
And I really did think that was such a great way to learn, because you feel like it's not intimidating to table a question or to discuss or debate amongst peers.
Exactly. And what I've noticed in the past, and I even used to do this when I was a student, is when the lecturer would ask, are there any questions? And the room's just silent. Yeah. Because nobody's afraid of asking a question because they don't want to look stupid.
Right. Yeah.
So I always begin the class by there are no stupid questions. I ask stupid questions every day. But I don't think they're stupid. They're questions. So if you have a question, ask it, because there might be 2 or 3 other persons who have the same question.
And that's almost always the case.
And that's always the case, because, like for example, this last semester, I was teaching a course, and the class was relatively small. It was like 13 students, 12 or 13 students. They're in 3rd year. And there was this one topic that had to do with like the reproduction cycle of I think it was of green algae or brown algae, seaweed and stuff. And at the end, I was like, that was a lot of information. So if you want me to go over anything or you have any questions, go ahead and ask it. And then this one student was just like, Miss, I don't understand nothing. And I was like, thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
And then you can just go over it. Because you take away that air of, I don't want to feel stupid. Or I don't want to feel like I'm the only one that doesn't get it. Yeah. And you make everybody else comfortable to say, I don't get it.
Sure.
And then that's how learning happens,
When they say things like that, do you, in your mind, reassess, or do you like sort of pick up things on your delivery? Or maybe I could switch this a little differently, or maybe let me try this approach, you know?
Yeah. And that's another thing when I was talking about like the learning curve and the learning experience of teaching. Most of it has to do with how I deliver a topic, because I understand that not everyone thinks like me. Or not everyone, takes in information the way I do. And as humans, we naturally explain things the way we understand it. And that isn't necessarily how someone else is going to understand it. So getting feedback like that helps me recalibrate how I explain certain parts. So I'll ask questions like, okay, what part didn't you get? Or is it the whole thing you don't get? Because if so, we could schedule a time after class and we could go over it one-on-one. Yeah. And I've discovered new ways of approaching topics. And I've discovered how to filter through stuff that isn't necessarily helping grasp the main theme versus stuff that is necessary for them to know.
Right.
Versus stuff that, if you want to know more about this, just give it a Google search or something, So, it's a game of like tug of war. It's like a push and pull kind of thing between the student and the lecturer, and both learn from each other.
Yeah. It's like communication training.
Yeah.
For you. teacher here.
Right, yeah.
Did you go to school here for university?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did, Marin Academy for high school. And then I did sixth form at QC.
Okay.
And then after that, I did my bachelor's in biology at UG. And I started my career basically from UG onwards. So after I finished my bachelor's, I was looking around for things to do. I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to go straight into a master's right away. And then I saw an advertisement for a PhD. And I was like, okay, cool. Let me see if I could apply for like a research position on this project, because it was in a place called the Irrakrama Rainforest. And I had been there multiple times before. I was familiar with the staff there, I was familiar with the rainforest. I was like, this would be a great chance for more, on the ground experience. So I went in, applied, and did the interview. And they were like, we'd like to offer you the PhD scholarship.
Wow.
And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, if you want it. So I was a little bit apprehensive because, I hadn't done a master's as yet. So I didn't know, is this something you can do? And I had spoken to my undergraduate supervisor, and I had done some Google searching, and it was possible. The main criteria for that is having experience within the particular area that you're getting the PhD in. And because it was in the Irrakrama Rainforest and I'd done field work there before, they were like, okay, you're a good candidate for this scholarship. So I went ahead and did it. And 4 years later, here I am.
Talk about like right place, right time.
I know,
kind of
right?
thing,
Yeah. It was, Mom loves that topic because she likes to get all philosophical and spiritual. And it's like, God put you there for a reason.
Yeah.
So,
I love it, though.
but yeah, I feel like, when you look back and you think about all the things you did right or not right, and I don't think I would ever change that decision to go ahead and do that PhD, because it taught me a lot. It taught me so much.
What were those 4 years like?
Very turbulent. It had a lot of highs, but also a lot of lows, because it was also during the pandemic.
Right. You started.
In 2019.
Okay.
So half of that time spent doing my PhD, I spent behind a desk. Everywhere was closed. There was a lot of uncertainty at that time. So there was a lot of uncertainty around traveling for field work, getting funding. So it was a tough beginning. And then I think once the field work had started and I had gotten into the groove of that field work and it had ended and the write-up started, it started to get better because we were coming out of the pandemic by that time. And I had traveled to the UK for the first time because the PhD was in collaboration with the University of Kent.
Okay.
So there was a lot of firsts for me. And, thinking back on it combined, I would say it was, let's give it like an 8 out of 10 experience, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The uncertainty, I think, is what kills a lot of people as well. I mean, you really never know, especially with research-based things, that are funded by organizations. When the world shuts down, it's like, what's going on?
Everything shut down. I remember, so my first round of field work began in November, or was it February of 2020? It was February of 2020. Because that was when everyone was starting to talk about lockdowns and
that's
all
just
of that.
before it happened in March.
And we had gotten a message from the head office, from the Irrakrama head office, saying that the field work needs to end by this point because we need to get everybody out from the field station. All of the rangers that were working with me, they had to go back to their communities. And, we were kind of scared because we didn't know, okay, when we get back to the lodge, are there going to be vehicles? Because they had already started sending people home.
Sure, yeah.
So it was kind of a case where I felt a little bit rushed to finish up all this work. And it was right when I was now getting into it and getting, starting to explore this rainforest more. And then to be told, hey, you got to leave.
Yeah.
it was a little bit heartbreaking. But I understood that this was just the situation at the time.
What was your research on again?
Oh, yeah. So I studied sustainable logging.
Okay.
So Iraqama practices this sustainable logging practice called reduced impact logging. And my research in particular was looking at vertebrate community change in the rill. We call it rill.
I was
rill
reading.
rainforest.
I was reading briefly the papers published that you publish in collaboration with other people. On ResearchGate. Is that the website?
Yeah. So ResearchGate is just where all the research is compiled on.
Right. Yeah. So I just skimmed over some art in lieu of this. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad we could talk about it.
Yeah. So the research started with my external supervisor, Jake Bicknell, Dr. Jake Bicknell. And his PhD was on Iraqama's logging as well. So what he did was he wanted to understand how vertebrate populations change in response to something like sustainable logging. So sustainable logging is supposed to be this alternative, better version of logging compared to conventional where they just cut everything. Right? So it's supposed to be more beneficial to the environment. It's supposed to promote community recovery for the wildlife communities there.
How do you define sustainable logging? Is that cutting and leaving canopy still intact? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's cutting, let's say instead of, so let's say you have a cake, right? And before you just used to cut the cake anywhere and everywhere. So there wasn't much cake left at the end, right? Sustainable logging is you have a cake and you cut one piece and then you leave the rest for, let's say, later, like five years later or whatever. You come back, you cut another small piece, save it for later. Now, if that cake was able to self-regenerate within that 5 years, it would self-regenerate that piece that you cut.
Yeah.
So that's the idea behind sustainable logging. So you take out timber species. So you extract timber species, but you're not extracting a whole chunk of your forest environment. So the forest itself, the landscape matrix remains more or less intact. So with reduced impact logging, that takes it a step further where you have all of these prerequisites that you need to do. So you have persons coming in and they do what's called a pre-harvest inventory. So they go in and they identify trees that you could cut. So they'll measure the diameter by breast height to see if the tree is mature enough for you to cut. Then they'll flag it. Then afterwards, once that inventory is done, you have your loggers come in, they see that tag, and they cut only that tree, right?
Okay.
And beyond that, there's another step that they take. So in rainforests, you tend to have a lot of lianas and vines in addition to your large emergent trees. So it's all very interconnected.
Yeah.
So when a tree falls, it usually
Tears down all of that stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So with reduced impact logging, what they do is once they've identified that tree, they shave down any lianas that are attached to it so that when they fell that tree, only that tree is going to fall. Nothing else is going to fall with it.
And lianas could always grow back because they're still connected.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. You think the resources used to do that are significantly higher than traditional logging?
Oh, yeah, it's expensive. It's pretty expensive. I once read this paper that was really funny when I was researching about reduced impact logging. And it said that, it's called reduced impact logging or RIL, but to a logging company, RIL means reduced income logging. And I was like, you know what? That's really funny. And it's really true because you no longer have just a logging company just taking logs. You have additional resources and expertise that you have to pay for.
Right.
Right. So the way they counteract that is that reduced sustainably logged timber sells at a higher price.
Yeah.
And then you have agencies such as the Forest Stewardship Council, the FSC. They oversee sustainable practices. So, for example, Iraqama's rainforest is FSC certified. So when you see that FSC symbol on any timber product, it means that the timber used to make that product was sourced through sustainable practices that are
Automatically
FSC store
value
certified
added.
at a higher value.
Who buys? Before we get on to the results of your research, which is the important part, who buys that sort of high value timber from Iwokrama?
I'm not sure, but I do know that for Guyana as a whole, the UK is one of our biggest timber buyers.
Okay.
In terms of like specifics on that, I'm not too sure because I didn't study the economics of it really.
Sure.
Yeah.
Totally understandable. I was just curious. It probably is the UK because Iwokrama, I think, is funded largely in part by the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and they have their patron
right.
as well.
So with regards to the reduced impact logging, what were the results? Did you notice a less than significant decrease in vertebrate populations, or?
Yeah. Oh man, I'm gonna sound like a real nerd now.
No,
but yeah. So one of the things that Jake and I wanted to assess was proving the statement that RIL is a better option, right? We wanted to give data and information to back up that claim, right? So what we did was Jake's data would have been taken 10 years, roughly 10 years before they had started logging. And so that was a pre-logging data set.
So he was collecting biodiversity data
before they
way
started.
before you started this.
Yeah.
10 years before. Gotcha.
So we call that the pre-logging data set. So that was what the wildlife community looked like before they started logging. And then he collected 1 year after.
Okay.
So he analyzed those two time frames. And then 10 years later, I come in and I reassess that same area. So what we had was 3 time frames. We had pre-logging, 1 year after logging, and 10 years after logging. And what we did was we compared that trend. And I had introduced something called Bayesian statistics, which is just like probability testing. So the question we asked was, is the community 10 years later similar to the community before logging even began? Because that would help answer the question that, RIL doesn't have much of an impact because, look, the wildlife community is more or less the same as it was before logging even started. And the answer we got was really interesting because, yes, it was more or less the same, but the communities were different. So when we're talking about it being more or less the same, the numbers were roughly the same. So the number of species that we were counting were the same, but the types of species had changed. That was really interesting to us because when you're looking at something like population ecology, when your community dynamics shift, it indicates a resource shift. So you have species that are going to stay. So let's say a disturbance happens, because at the end of the day, logging is still a disturbance. So you have a disturbance happen and you take away a resource or take away a part of a resource that some species will use. That resource could be food. That resource could be nesting sites. It could be mates, right? You take away that resource and then you leave that community. And over years and years, what starts to happen is species respond to that change.
Yeah.
Either they're gonna leave because the resource is no longer there, or other species come in. So they see that resource change and they're like, free real estate. Let me, come in here. And that was the community shift, or the community or the assemblage change is what we called it. That was what we were seeing in the data. And we had concluded that although the richness remained the same, RIL did contribute to a community assemblage change. But we would still say that it's better than conventional logging, because despite this assemblage change being different compared to pre-logging, the communities still remain more or less intact.
Yeah.
Right? So instead of 10 specialist species, we would record 7 or 8. Right?
Like, well, can you give me some examples on the type of species? Like,
Yeah. So
which ones moved out, which ones came in?
so we did it mainly according to feeding guilds.
Okay.
So that informed the resource change that we were seeing. So for feeding guilds, the species that we saw changing the most were like the insectivores and the nectarivores. So species that feed on nectar from plants and stuff like that, which makes sense because with your change, the change in your floral community because of the logging, you're going to have different species sprouting up,
Yeah.
right? So that explained the nectarivores. And for the insectivores, what was happening was more related to microclimatic change. So there's this phenomenon with tropical rainforests where you have your overall climate, and then within the forest floor or the forest understory has its own microclimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll notice like whenever you're walking through a field and then you walk into a rainforest, it's way cooler. You know, it's a entirely different atmosphere almost.
Yeah.
When you introduce something like logging, what happens is you get canopy gaps or canopy openings. And that sunlight is going to penetrate that forest floor and sort of change that microclimate environment.
Creates its own ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that influences your insect diversity and your insect abundance. And insectivores, they feed on insects. So that'll change the types of species that are going to come in and or leave the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. The 10-year date of like when you complete the 10-year limit of research. What year was that? 2020? What?
2021 was my last field season.
Oh, okay. So it ended 2021.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was going to ask you if you think that, I mean, 1 year, I don't know if it makes a difference, but if the shutdown for COVID, for the pandemic, had any influence on the results, given there wasn't as much logging?
I don't think it would have an influence on the results because it was such a short time frame.
Yeah.
If you had a lockdown that spanned maybe 2 or 3 years, then yeah. With population ecology, changes are happening in an ecosystem all the time, whether it is natural or non-natural. You have species coming in, you have species going out, you have species migrating, dying, being born, etc. And a lot of environmental factors influence this. So what makes rill extra interesting is rill isn't impacting those otherwise natural changes to the extent where it's a problem, right? As compared to something like conventional logging, which overrides any natural change because you have such a drastic decline over a short period of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's like mining, right? It's like the operation at all costs.
Exactly.
Getting it done solely without. Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting to think about as well. I mean, logging, you never really get in any of these extractive industries, you never really understand the severity or implications of the activities unless you go in there and see it. You know, you see a tree fall down, or you, in the case of mining, you see like tons of earth just blasted away with the hose, you know, the wash. It's something I think like, you know, a lot of students could learn from as well.
Truly, because I think the general consensus is that, you know, when you see a big dry patch of rainforest or like a big gouge out from the rainforest, you assume that nothing is there anymore, that everything's just left. But there's this theory where, well, they call them trash species or dumpster species. The name's funny, but basically what they are is species that capitalize on disturbance.
Okay.
So they'll move in and just take any resources that are there, right? So dumpster species, they're also called generalists. So they're generalist feeders. So they don't have a particular requirement when it comes to their diet. So whether or not there is a patch in a rainforest, they'll still be able to find food.
What kind of species are we talking about? Like?
So a lot of bird species can be considered generalist feeders. You'd get generalists in the form of insectivores, so they don't specialize on a particular insect. So you have species like wood creepers, tanagers. They tend to feed on anything that they deem appropriate to eat,
Yeah.
right? Then you have more semi-specialist to specialist feeders like army ant following insectivores, right? So birds like white plume ant birds, they are army ant followers. And what they'll do is, as army ant colonies move through the forest floor, they're gonna pick up any like dead insects or insects in general and just carry them back to the colony.
Yeah.
And what those birds will do is they'll pick off, basically stealing their food.
Yeah.
Right. So they'll follow these
Opportunists.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have your very very specialist feeders. So like your larger frugivores or your larger carnivorous birds, right? So what determines a generalist from a specialist is really how niche their diet is and how much flexibility they have.
Yeah.
Right? So when it comes to something like logging, looking at diets is particularly important because as you're extracting timber, you're taking away resources, whether that be through food or through species that interact with that timber
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I generally concluded was that specialists are mostly affected, and that's regardless of how intense the disturbance is.
And when they're, the specialists obviously are way more at risk, but when they move away, how easy is it for them to adapt to different environments, or do you just notice like a decline in population, or is it tough to tell?
It's sometimes tough to tell, but one of the things about population dynamics in particular is that if there's a decline, we can't rule out the possibility that we just didn't record it.
True.
Yeah. So
especially in the rainforest,
especially in the rainforest,
so thick and
exactly.
Just listening to what you're saying too, and all of my experience being in there, we really take for granted the micro ecosystems that exist all over. You know, like just picturing what you're telling me about the birds looking at the army ants and looking for the dead bugs that they carry back to their nest. Like I'm picturing that in my head. I've seen all of this before, but never really connected the dots, right? Because when you walk into the forest, you know, the average person, the biggest thing is, oh, let me not step on a snake. Let me look at where I'm going. Let me focus on what I got to do. But there's everything is going on around you all at once.
I think, you know what's the best movie I think that really captured that? Avatar.
Oh, really?
Avatar really captured that very well.
I'm ashamed to say. I know what Avatar is.
You haven't seen Avatar?
I haven't watched it. That's one of the few movies I haven't watched.
That's your 2025 goal.
Yeah, I gotta get that done.
But the whole idea behind at least the first one and the second one to an extent, was that the rainforest itself is interconnected. Everything feeds into everything. You know, this whole idea that trees communicate with one another. You know, that was a principle that was wild to me that I discovered during my PhD.
Yeah.
You know,
there's a book on that.
Yeah. There's a book on that. Well, I don't know which book you're talking about, but there's one, The Life of Trees.
Yeah, Life of Trees.
Life of Trees.
My wife read it and told me about it.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. And then from that network, you even have your underground networks, so your mycorrhizal networks, and then that feeds into how the trees communicate, and that feeds into how they produce fruit, when they fruit, how often they fruit, and then that affects everything else from your frugivores to your predators, right? And even down to the smaller animals that you'll never see in your life, but are also important for things like seed dispersal, for decomposition, all of those things, they all have a role.
Yeah. Insane. I just shifting slightly. I read on ResearchGate when I was going through your research papers and the ones you're attached to. There was one on it talks about correct me if I'm wrong, but it's human crocodilian conflict.
Yeah, human wildlife
conflict, specifically talking about the black caiman. I found that so interesting because, you know, I've obviously heard a ton of stories visiting different communities, stuff like that. People are fascinated by human wildlife conflict. You know,
Yeah.
it's such a highly entertaining topic. It's like listening to crime
Yeah, yeah,
podcasts. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
And but when you go in there and you kind of hear the stories, and it's not as like sinister as people make it out to be. It's just the reality, you know.
Yeah.
And the people who are living in there, the indigenous people, are just cognizant of the dynamics and the possibilities of what can go wrong because they're competing for similar resources.
Yes.
Everyone's part of the ecosystem.
Yes.
But I found it fascinating how like certain attitudes toward the caiman were different across different communities.
Yeah.
Could you talk some like more about how that research went and some things you may have noticed that were interesting to you?
Yeah. So the Cayman Project is really near and dear to my heart because it was my first proper exposure to the Rupununi.
Okay.
So I did it as my undergrad research. And I worked with Cayman House as well as some partners in LATAM.
Okay.
And the main objective was to look at perceptions because perceptions inform how we respond to wildlife presence, right? So perceptions, they're influenced through the media, so movies, music, video games, but then also stories.
Yeah.
So in these communities, I wanted to know if there was, stories of either attackings or cultural folklore that was influencing how the people in these communities were viewing Black Cayman in particular. And it was a mixed bag because what we found was the people who had the most negative perceptions towards Black Cayman were people who directly use the river all the time. So fisher people, right? They would leave their nets, and Black Cayman, through just decades of living alongside humans, they've learned to go after the nets because the nets have fish in them.
Yeah.
Right? So it was mainly about the fish that was causing that negative perception. But before, what we used to think is it was because of the attacks. And so whenever they saw a Black Cayman, they would kill it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like the jaguar coming and attacking your cow.
Exactly. But in actuality, a lot of persons were like, no, if anything, I haven't heard of a Black Cayman attacking somebody in years. It's mainly about the fact that they are competing for the same fish resources that's causing that tension.
Yeah. But
And
in a place like, sorry to cut you, in a place like the Rupununi, especially on the rivers, you think that because it's so far out, not many people are going there. There's an abundance of fish.
Yeah.
Why would there be significant conflict?
Dry season.
Okay.
Because when it's dry season, you have limited places where you can go and fish. So people will just go to those permanent ponds, where a lot of fish will also go to.
Yeah.
And the caiman are going to follow. So there's a heightened tension during the dry season. The wet season is more variable, so it's going to vary from village to village. But it was mainly the dry season that people reported a lot more interactions with Black Cayman because of the fact that there were so limited permanent pond spots that they could go to.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you mentioned the media and how we learn about these animals. People who are not in those rural areas, I think the perception is solidified through this sort of form, this extremist media, this sensationalist.
Yeah.
The movie Anaconda, has ruined anacondas for me forever. And things like that. And there are a lot of, not to say that these things don't ever happen.
Yeah.
But it's just bizarre to think that that's the first thing that is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we see it in town too. It's like, every time now that with the development going on, with all these trenches being cleared, and, it kind of hurts to see the public's response to these animals coming out onto the roads or into
Yes.
public space, and the first response being to chop it or to
Yes.
get
Did
rid
you
of
see
it.
that video of that lady, I think it was an anaconda that
Coming
came
out to
out
the
of her
car.
car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Very
everybody
sad.
was like just freaking out and they were
Yeah.
like, kill it, kill it.
Yeah.
And I always think to myself, I was like, the anaconda is probably very scared right now.
Oh yeah, but
Probably
that's I
terrified.
think that is something would be good messaging as an awareness, right? Is to show how terrified
Yeah.
the animal
And
is.
then the thing about it is, for a lot of wildlife, they'll only attack if threatened.
Yeah.
Right? So that anaconda coming out of that woman's car, again, its main goal was to get as far away from these people as possible.
Yeah.
And it would have done that if people hadn't, wanted to intervene and kill it and so on.
Yeah.
And it does come back to perception again, because for the same reason, movies like Anaconda and stuff like that, it makes people think that their life is at stake as soon as this animal sees them. A similar thing can be said for the large cats,
Yeah.
jaguars and pumas in particular. I've personally never come in contact with a jaguar. And the first time I started doing field work, I was really worried about that, because same thing, perception was like, oh, this cat's gonna stalk me and eat me in my hammock or something, right? And I decided to talk to one of the rangers about it. This is at Irakrama again. And he was like, chances are that jaguar doesn't see you long before you see it. And it's not gonna bother you. And the wave of relief that came over me in that moment, cats like jaguars and pumas, and I guess this could even be carried on to black caiman and anacondas and the really big, charismatic predators.
Yeah.
Chances are they're going to know you're there before you even get an idea, right? And 9 times out of 10, they'll decide not worth it.
Yeah.
Not worth it. If anything, jaguars think we look like weird monkeys. And they're like, I don't really want to,
Yeah.
touch you. So go on your merry way,
Definitely.
And another way to think about it is, when we see something odd or that is outside of the day-to-day things that we see, our first instinct isn't to attack it, right? We're going to stay at a distance. We're going to observe it. But like, okay, what are you doing? Why are you here? And if we perceive that it is not a threat, right? So if it's just walking past us, or it's just doing whatever it needs to do, and it doesn't look aggressive, it isn't actively looking for us,
Yeah.
right? We're going to leave it alone. And it's the same kind of rationale, I think, that's for big cats.
Yeah.
And for a lot of these large predators, energy consumption is a big thing, right? So the way that animals gauge whether or not to attack you is it worth exerting this much energy to kill this prey, to eat it? So there's a lot of risk benefit that's going on in their mind,
Yeah.
right? And more than half of the times, they'll decide not to do it.
Yeah. Do I risk getting hurt,
Exactly.
and crippled, and not being able to feed myself again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with wild cats, because of the intense competitive environment that they live in, energy preservation is a big thing,
Yeah.
because you don't know when your next meal is going to be. So they'll more go after an injured deer than a man with a cutlass or a group of 5 students.
Yeah.
Right. And that, I think, once you have that mindset when you're going into the rainforest, I find that more than you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Just don't go poking it with a stick.
Yeah. Or just don't break your leg alone. somewhere.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird. I mean, it's nice to have these discussions, because it's like it just presents a different way to think about it. It doesn't solve the immediate attitude towards it or fear, but it's like, okay, maybe I could try thinking about it in a different way. I always get a bit, at the same time, being someone who is very much for species protection and conservation, I try not to ever preach to anyone as well, because I do understand that, especially people living in the rural areas, right? Like, I mean, not that I have any grounds to preach to them at all, but it's interesting because there are scenarios where, like, I've been in a camp before, and the indigenous guys taking care of us, who set up the camp, who are, basically in charge of making sure everything goes okay. We found a labaria at the camp. And those guys have had experiences dealing with the dangers of very poisonous snakes before, and they killed it, they chopped it, which may have not been the right thing to do, but it maybe for me, it was tough to say, like, no, we shouldn't kill it. I'm gone tomorrow. They're like,
they have to live with that.
And also they're responsible for the safety of the camp, not just me, for their people. So it's kind of like, you obviously want to have best practice, but I look at situations like that and see it as not a reckless killing. Just like, look, we've been in this position before. We're in the middle of nowhere, hours and hours from civilization. If this gets close to anyone, it's a problem. And same thing for people who rear cattle, it sucks with the jaguar, because when jaguars are attacking cattle, you either lose, I don't know, one cattle.
It's money out your pocket.
I'm making it up, is $100,000.
About probably more.
So every time the jaguar takes a cattle,
that's
so
money out of your pocket.
You're gonna fire a shot, or you're gonna just let it happen. It's a tough thing to reconcile with.
It is a tough thing to reconcile with, and when we were doing the wildlife conflict stuff, we always had to keep that at the back of our mind. One of the things that we found participants were really afraid to talk about was whether or not they had killed a caiman, because the black caiman is protected, right? So it was a case where they're well aware that this animal is protected by law or policy, or even if it isn't protected, if it has a lot of conservation efforts being pumped into keeping it there, right? They're not going to be upfront with us about the fact that I've killed it. But the way I've learned to see it, and this comes from the types of scientists that I've surrounded myself with over the years, is when it comes to livelihoods, especially indigenous livelihoods, you need to approach these situations with a little more flexibility. Because you can chalk and talk to heaven and back about why these species are important, but there are stories of people's family members being killed, people's friends being injured, same thing you were talking about, people's livestock, being taken away. And when indigenous communities feel like you don't care, it creates this case where they're not going to tell you anything, right? And that comes back to bite us as the conservationists, because our efforts are to conserve these animals. But if we don't know that they're being killed...
And those are the guys on the front line.
And those are the guys on the front line, exactly. So over the years, I've seen a little bit of a shift, especially in Guyana, when it comes to wildlife conflict, where the approach is to educate about why it would be better to move it out of the village. If it's a snake, we could teach you, like safe snake handling procedures, right? Or we could introduce you to somebody that has that experience, and if there's a snake nearby or a snake around your house, you call them, right? Let killing it not be the first thing, but we understand you don't want it near the village. Same thing with jaguars. There's been a lot of research into the motion responsive lights. So when jaguars see lights flash on, they think it's a hunter, and they bolt out of there, right? So encouraging farmers to install motion sensitive lights.
That's a good one. I never even thought about that one.
So there's been a lot of increased awareness about other ways to approach this instead of automatically killing the animal. That way we both win.
Yeah.
You know, your cattle remains safe, that jaguar remains safe.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect system, and there's still cases whereby, you know, we haven't even begun to tackle the area of animals evolving and learning. Right? So that's a whole new ball field that we'll have to tackle in the years to come.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of progress in that area where persons are understanding, okay, this animal, it's only doing what it needs to do to survive, but I need to survive as well.
Yeah.
So let me and you shake hands, you go on your way, you leave my cattle alone, right? And then another thing that a lot of people don't realize is jaguars that go for cattle or calves, they're either injured or elderly, right? So it's easy pickings, coming back to that same thing with energy consumption, right? A mature jaguar has a large home range, and it will more go for the food sources it knows than a food source that it's unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
So only when it's in those desperate times where it either can't chase down a peccary or a deer or a tapir would it go for that singular little calf that's right there in the open waiting for mom to come back from grazing. You know, so that's some of the things that you could also tell persons who cattle rear. Or for the case of snakes, oftentimes what happens is snakes can't regulate their body temperature, right? Because they're cold-blooded. So when the place is really cold, they gravitate toward heat sources, right? So whether that's your house or if you're in a hammock, your body temperature, right? I had an instance where I had slung up my hammock and it was a bit too low, and I'd fallen asleep and I woke up to a bunch of head torches around my hammock. And I was like, what's going on? And they were like, oh, there's a lobaria under your hammock.
Oh, no way.
And it turns out it was raining earlier that night. And that's how I learned, okay, it's attracted to body heat, right? So if the place is really cold, they're going to, so you take measures to avoid that, right? What a lot of rural occupants will also do is they'll make sure to not have too many lingering bushes and vines about or near to their home. So they'll keep that whole area or that downstairs area very flat, very sandy, you know, very, so they could see everything.
Yeah.
And snakes aren't going to gravitate towards that. They don't like being in that open. They prefer a little hidey hole somewhere. Right? So there are ways to combat it, but we are always, I feel like that conflict with people choosing to kill something, it's always going to be there. It's just our job as scientists to help steer them in a better path, but not tell them that what they're doing is wrong or they're going to go to hell, you know?
Yeah.
So
at the very least, I mean, it's such a great topic for research. With especially how you mentioned, you know, animals evolving to certain changes and, you know, different sort of human-animal conflicts, fascinating stuff. And definitely the stuff people want to learn about. You know, at least the idea of it grips them. But then when you really get deeper, it's like, okay, wow, I didn't even know that.
yeah.
Like, that was crazy.
And then I've felt it before when we've gone into communities. They'll be like, "Oh God, here comes the science nerd."
Yeah.
Are you gonna tell me jaguars are good? You know, so
Here comes the self-righteous
right?
stoners,
Yeah, it's like you go home to your fancy house with your air conditioning and your, you know, and your whatever, like.
And it's fair. It's fair. You know, like you know, but obviously, you know, there has to be a balance. But science, I mean, like I just the field of, I could see why this is so appealing to you to do, especially in a place like Guyana where the resources in terms of material is so good, so rich. You know, I wish that, just to share a story with you, I wouldn't say I'm a space nerd, but I'm very interested in space and the whole concept of, you know, other life forms outside of us, not aliens and UFOs kind of thing, but
Right.
just the concept that there has to be life in the
Yeah.
great expanse of our
Yeah.
universe and beyond, right? Recently I went to a place called the Kennedy Space Center. It's like in close to Orlando, and they have all these like rockets and space shuttles from the missions NASA did years ago, and they've sort of created this theme park where you could go learn about space and all these things, right? And for me, it was just like such an amazing experience to just see it close up. And obviously Americans do production value like no one else, you know. So how they present it is like
Yeah.
you're inspired, you
Yeah.
know, like and I just feel like for me, we have so much opportunity to do that. You know, like I think like if we hear it a lot in like political speeches or patriotic speeches, but Guyana being this amazing place of different landscapes and people and blah blah blah, and but it's all in rhetoric, right? It's all in you know, kind of just agenda esque presentations, and all this kind of thing. But if we really thought about sharing that information in a way that is just beautifully presented, we can inspire so many people.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm inspired having this conversation, even though I've seen all this stuff before
Yeah.
too. You know, like it's
Yeah.
like it's so rich and it's so like, you know, showing the forest in that huge, like just exploding world of teething with life
Yep.
on the one like square mile of canopy. You know, it's like that's mind blowing if you can present that well. You know, and it has, and more importantly, it has the power to bring people together.
Yes.
To share information, to question, blah blah blah. And I really think like, you know, the we need to do a better job as a whole. And you could speak to how it's being done now, just being in the academic space, but you know, how can we present this better? How can we? I don't know what the enthusiasm towards the sciences is like now with this
Yeah.
generation, but I'm assuming like, you know, kids even well before university could be like heavily involved in this thing. You know,
Yeah.
these ideas.
My my interpretation of it is, with the younger generation, you have to constantly fight against the international media, right? So like how they're seeing other places versus how they're seeing Guyana.
Okay.
There's a disconnect there, I feel, right? Because, and I tried this with my students once. I was like, you know, here's what I want you guys to make a poster, because this was around the COP 27, was it?
Okay.
Can't remember the numbers, but the most recent
Yeah, yeah,
COP,
yeah.
right?
In
And I was like, okay.
Azerbaijan.
So I was like, okay, make a poster detailing a major threat to our world right now. It was part of the course curriculum. So a lot of them were talking about, biodiversity loss and deforestation. I was like, I think they were trying to pull on my specific heartstrings a little bit with all of that anyways. And they're talking about deforestation and, you know, climate change and all of that, right? But all of the examples were from other countries. You know, all of the species that they were talking about, Bengal tiger, you know, the Asian elephant, the polar bear, right? I think probably 2 groups talked about the jaguar. One talked about deforestation in Brazil. I was like, okay, I'll take it. It's nearby. But in terms of knowing what's happening here,
Yeah.
nada. You know? And I paused and I asked my mom, I was like, what is it that we're doing wrong that's making the younger generation, or even young adults, my age even, right, not see that the same things are happening here? You know? And I think part of it has to do with the fact that everybody sees Guyana as this ecotourism heaven landscape, but nobody really talks about what's affecting it, what's causing the declines that we're seeing, the mining that's going on, wildlife trade is a big thing here, and it's happening a lot of times in these areas that are otherwise promoted as these ecotourism hotspots. Even down to Irrequama faces their own hurdles,
Yeah.
And I always try my best to be like, talk about something in Guyana. Talk about something that's going on in Guyana. And I think with this new academic year that's coming up, I want to cater my courses to more of the local context and talking specifically about Guyana, because we need that. And when you go into the workforce, if you're going into the workforce with an NGO or with a government agency, that's when you're now exposed to Guyana-specific issues and Guyana-specific wildlife. And coming from a biology program that's in Guyana, that shouldn't be. You should already know the difference between a jaguarundi and a jaguar.
Yeah.
You should already know that the oncilla is one of the biggest, illegal wildlife trade species, targeted species, because it looks like a little cute cat. So people specifically go after the oncilla. We should already know that jaguars aren't tigers. A lot of times students are like, Miss, we got tigers in here. And I was like, no.
Yeah.
So I don't blame them for going to what they know, because the Western world and other developed nations, they've done such a spectacular job of putting out documentaries and putting out information about their homeland and their countries, even about other countries, right? And that's mass produced and mass spread. Even when you're scrolling on Facebook, you're going to see a clip from National Geographic or from Animal Planet and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? But when you scroll and see a pic or scroll and see a post from like a local agency or something, it's always about how great Guyana is and look how beautiful Guyana is. And, that's fine. That's amazing. But tell me more. Give me information that I'm getting from like National Geographic. Give me information about,
give me some like balanced context.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy you brought that up, because, and again, this is a very complex issue. It's simple, but it's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
The simple part of it to me is that we are here bigging up everything while having our head in the sand.
Yes.
In the sand on certain things, like ostriches, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way we communicate anything in the public space, and it's so ironic to me, because Guyana is such an imperfect place. I'm not criticizing or shit on Guyana, right?
I completely get it.
I just feel like the narrative, especially when it comes from the national side, always has to be so overwhelmingly positive, where it becomes a facade.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And it is positive, by the way. I'm not saying it's bad. And we should be bigging up Guyana,
Right.
but we just refuse to accept
It's
realities.
not realistic. Yeah.
It's not realistic.
Right?
So going back to like pristine rainforest and ecotourism, and then there's mining. Nobody's saying, oh, we got to shut down all the mines and, down with gold, blah, blah, blah. It's, you have to still acknowledge that is a threat to what you're preaching on the world stage about this pristine,
And
location.
you always see that. You always see that in like those wildlife documentaries.
Yeah.
They're going to talk about the positives. The positives are there,
Yeah.
But this is the threat to that positive.
Yeah, like they're doing something on tigers, and they're like, but just 100 miles away is a logging operation that is impacting these tigers. And at least they like give context
and it's
to what's happening.
informative. It's informative, at least for me, because, life is not all positive.
Yeah.
There are some nasty sides to life that we have to come to grips with that exist in our world. And Guyana is no exception.
Yeah.
Guyana has gorgeous wildlife, gorgeous landscapes. And so many people do such an excellent job at documenting that, right? But it creates this idea that nothing is affecting Guyana's wildlife or nothing is threatening it.
Yeah.
When there is stuff that's threatening it. And I think we're doing Guyanese and our generations a disservice by not highlighting that more, because what happens is youths love a call to action. They love believing in a cause. They want a cause to believe in, right? And when you present, in my opinion, and I feel like National Geographic does this really well. When you present a picture or a video of a jaguar mom and her cubs, right? And you resonate with that, and you think that's so lovely and that's so beautiful, and this country is so lucky to have this beautiful species there, right? And then you pivot to something like wildfires, and you show the devastation that wildfires cause, right? That clicks in my brain that this is something that's happening in our country. Let me research about that more. How do I donate to that? How do I,
Yeah.
It isn't always a case where positive posts and engagements will solve the issue. Sometimes you need to make people
Hardly
uncomfortable. Yeah, you need to make people uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what's going to trigger in them, my children can't grow up in a world like this.
Yeah.
What can I do to help?
Yeah. At least make them think. I mean, I think there's irony as well in, bigging up ecotourism, which, is a very, and I'm all for ecotourism, but my beef with solely focusing on it from a tourism perspective is that it's such a limited market, right? It's value added, so it's for a specific niche group that pay a lot of money to come to see pristine rainforest, to be catered to do things that that are not easily accessible, and you have to limit the traffic that's going through these
Yep.
operations, right? Or else it's not eco.
Yep.
So it's not a big market. It's not accessible to everyone. A lot of people on Facebook complain, oh, well, our ecotourism product should cater to locals. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not supposed to. I'm not saying it shouldn't, or that you guys shouldn't, everybody, we shouldn't be able as Guyanese to see these places. But the reality is just, if you're looking for something affordable, that's not the market. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is that I think operations like mining is what is running the economy. That's where all the money is being made. So the fact that they're, that's sort of a hush hush kind of thing. Everybody's scared to touch that topic. Because I've tried to do coverage on mining, not necessarily in a bad way.
Yeah.
Just
Just
to,
like,
again,
for
to
awareness.
juxtapose. Yeah,
Yeah.
to juxtapose awareness. Because I do think it's important. I am not for shutting down mining at all. But I do think there's better ways to do it. There's more information on how it's done that can be made more transparent. But again, it's like, because so many people are making so much money off of it, it'll threaten a lot of livelihoods. So it's not in anyone in power's interest to show the negatives of this grand economic activity. So, we kind of have to understand the things at play, but it's just so naive and insulting to, again, just be bigging up one thing and then refusing to address the other, or even, again, blocking any coverage of it.
Yeah.
A lot of times I when I deal with public sector, I kind of, the attitude is kind of always like, just make sure Guyana looks in
good.
the best light.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Guyana's going to look good either way.
yeah.
You
And I mean, like, there's, give Guyana some credit,
Yeah.
like the people could also make it better if they acknowledge what's wrong,
That's the thing. Guyana, she is a beautiful country.
Yeah.
She's got so much richness and so much to be blessed and thankful about. As Guyanese, especially, we are so blessed and thankful to be living in a country like Guyana. We ain't got to worry about volcanoes.
Yeah.
We ain't got to worry about hurricanes.
We just got some generational trauma.
We just got some
that's all.
generational trauma, that's all. Mother used to beat me for go bed before we go to bed, But beyond that, there are things that pose a serious threat to the longevity of this beauty that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And to not bring light to that is doing Guyana a disservice, And I think what part of it is what makes people so apprehensive to talk about these things is that Guyanese like to look for someone to blame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Easy.
it's easy. It's easy to look for somebody to blame, whether that be, this agency or that agency or this president or that president. You just put the blame on somebody and then forget about it.
Yeah.
Right? But my whole thing is if you don't blame anybody, acknowledge that this is happening and work towards either lessening it or stopping it, right? Blaming somebody will get you nowhere beyond just people saying, well, you got to try,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That's yeah. It's a crazy I wonder why it is though. Well, why do you think the culture is not as there's no the words or the emotions don't. I spoke to somebody about this just today. Why do you think the words or emotions don't ever translate into action on anything, on any issue that is, that needs fixing, whether it's like, driving better on the road or, bad business practice or whatever it is, like outrage, it doesn't ever.
That's that has to do with our attitudes, I feel, and that's something you gotta go way back to address. You're talking about years and years of generational unlearning that you gotta do to really understand why people react the way they do to things like this. And it's like on the same thing with driving, because I was like, oh God. Right? The driving in this country is definitely something. And I feel like what I've noticed with a lot of Guyanese drivers is you could see 5 accidents pop up on your Facebook page, right? And you're going to hop in your car and you're going to speed down the highway. Right? And I feel like part of the reason why you're going to do that is because Guyanese have this thing that, like, as a boss driver, nothing going to happen to me. Like, all the other drivers is stupid. So I know how to drive. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody says that. Yeah. Everybody thinks they're a great driver. Right? And the part where it comes into like that generational unlearning is our culture has, we applaud reckless driving in a way. We applaud persons who navigate in and out of traffic like a bad man, Oh, that's a bad driver, yeah. We applaud things like that. And I don't know why we do it. And then the person gets in an accident and it's like, man, he should have slowed down, It's like, what are you talking about? I was like, what are you talking about? Right? And I once saw this car. He had a sticker on the back. If he's gonna be listening to this podcast, I call your name. Well, I know your name, but I call you out. He had this sticker on the back of his car that said, "Don't worry, I'm scared of my driving too."
Oh no way!
I'm like, that's a interesting take, my boy. And like,
yeah,
like you're applauding reckless driving.
Yeah,
and then you get into the accident, lives are lost, and then we're all like, damn, he should have slowed down. Why Guyanese can't just follow road laws? I was like, you didn't just clap in for the reckless driver like 2 days ago?
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Up to yesterday, I was coming off Wilford Avenue onto Camp, and it's like there's a bridge that goes on to Camp, and it's obviously a 2-lane, one going each way, right? So I'm exiting on the left, and cars come in on the right. But there wasn't any car coming in here. But the car behind me, I'm turning left. The car behind me decides to pull up next to me to try and turn. So he's blocking my line of vision to see any traffic coming.
Yeah.
So as he drive up, I inched up and blocked him off because I have a right of way, right? Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And he winds down his window to tell me, get off the effing road. You can't drive. And I'm like, I don't get angry anymore because it's pointless. I'll never see you again. I'll never learn your name. I know nothing about you other than what you just showed me. It doesn't matter anymore. But it's just the attitude of, you have done something clearly wrong and illegal, and you're upset,
upset
because
with-
I've inconvenienced you.
Yeah.
You know,
It's wild. I have this approach now where if I am at an intersection and I'm in the road that doesn't have the right of way, then I have to wait for the cars to pass before I can go, and somebody's blowing behind me.
oh, it's stressful.
Man, I make it a personal goal to drive as slow as possible.
Yeah,
You know, I'm just like, all right, good. I'm going to teach you patience.
yeah.
You know, if nobody else is going to teach you patience, it's going to be me.
I think that's the thing too. Is like we take a lot of pressure from the culture. You know.
Yeah.
Just 2 nights ago, my wife and I driving home. We're coming on the East Coast, the UG traffic light on the Rupert Craig Highway. A truck is turning, but he's quite long, so he has to turn wide.
Yeah.
And at the same time he's turning, coming onto UG Road, a car flies up and smashes into him, and they get in an accident. So they're now kind of blocking our lane's path. We're like 4 cars down, and even though there's an accident there that just happened, we still have the red. The line is still approaching onto the accident because they think now that there's an accident, they can just get through on a red.
Yeah.
And it's like,
It's crazy.
these guys just got in an accident.
It's crazy.
You know, like, why
Yeah.
do you think that an accident gives you a green light?
Yeah.
You know, it's the ultimate irony.
Yeah.
You know, so what I'm saying is that I'm losing hope day by day, slowly but surely.
You know, I'm not gonna. I'm a cup half full kind of girl.
Yeah,
So I like to think that, you know,
heard about you guys.
obnoxiously positive, you know. But I've had my days where I'm like, you know, Guyana is just hopeless when it comes to just person to person decency and respect.
Even Greg Quinn commented on it,
Yeah.
and he's you know, not in a bad way, in the most diplomatic way, but the fact that someone of diplomatic standing has to come out and make a
say
statement.
something. I
It's like,
shame.
Yeah, oh man. I felt bad. I wanted to call him on and apologize. You know.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. It's I don't know. There are days when I am so proud and happy to be Guyanese, and then there are days where I'm just like, I don't know them.
Yeah, it's tough. I think, yeah, you know, but which is why I really, and you know, I'm so happy to have you here and share your experience, because, you know, your role especially is so important for the younger generation who will be the change. Like, unfortunately, I think a certain part of our culture is too far gone, where it's very unlikely that they will change. It has to be the young people coming up to be like, look, like, we need better. We demanding better, and we're going to lead the charge. And if they can understand the power they will have to push policy, to push legislation, to push enforcement, you know, I think that's the only way it's going to happen, because the people in charge aren't going to listen to everybody of this generation abusing up on Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, you write the status on Facebook. Oh,
I
gosh.
hate that Facebook writing status, because you're just writing the status to your own echo chamber.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And I think, like, and again, to the same conversation, it doesn't translate emotion into action.
Yeah.
You feel more enraged as a consumer of someone's long status. You write your own little status, and then we going back to the same thing.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel with the younger generation, and this is where my cup half full comes in, I feel like they have such a stronger sense of environmental morals.
Okay.
You know, like they are all about, maybe it's because it's trendy or whatever, because they are more attached to social media. But it's one of those trends where I can see has a more positive impact, because they're more mindful of what they consume, or they're more mindful of choosing recyclable bags over the plastic bags and all those things. And, you know, if we could go to heaven and back talking about whether or not this actually works.
Yeah.
Do the paper straws work, right?
Not for drinking.
Not for
That's
drinking.
sure.
But the whole idea, I think, is to make awareness more broad,
Yeah.
you know, because it goes from choosing a paper bag to put your groceries in to learning about climate change to then learning about wildfires. And then, oh, Guyana has wildfires. And oh,
Yeah.
what do I do? Oh, my grandmother likes to burn her grass in her backyard. And oh, you know, Uncle got a farm that he's wants slash and burn from time to time. Let me talk to them about this. Like, so those things have ripple effects that do work,
Yeah.
you know? And I find this upcoming generation, they're way more upfront. You know, they tell you in your face, right?
Okay.
And they have this way of, you know, like the silent quitting thing, and they call it standing on business, or
Is that what the young kids are saying?
look at those two old people talking. It's like, yo, what? That's what the young kids are saying nowadays, you know? And, you know, they're just very opinionated. And when you're doing something wrong, they'll be like, this is wrong,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like if you can take that, steer it in the direction of wanting positive change, holding people accountable, whether that is your parents to your boss to head of state, right? Those things have effects. Those things have meaning, right? And when steered in the right direction, you can contribute to positive change in your country.
Yeah.
The issue here for Guyanese is filtering out the how would I call it? Like, there's like the left, you know, like filtering out. Okay, all right. So, you don't want to put your hair in one. You want to wear your hair down. That's fine. Make that an issue, sure. But don't make that the serious, hard-hitting thing that needs to change right away. You know, when you got a ton of wildlife dying on the road, ocelot knocked down, jaguar knocked down, you know, put that same energy towards speeding laws, you know, and force people to understand that this is not okay,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely. I think there's also, and like, this is just people also need to have more debate face to face. You know, I would love to, if you and I are disagreeing, I want us to disagree here. I want you to look me in the eye and I look you in the eye, and we tell each other how we feel.
And not fall out afterwards.
Yeah. Even if we disagree at the end, there's way more likely we find common ground.
Yeah.
You know, but if you and I are having this argument online, there's zero context, there's zero nuance to conversation, there's no tone of how you approach someone or talk to someone. I can't give you a smile to put you at ease, to let you know that the words you just said, I didn't take personally.
Yeah.
I actually appreciated how you put it over.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist online.
I also feel like people don't really want to have a discussion or a debate.
No.
They just want to
They just wanna
hit you with that comeback and get a ton of likes.
Exactly. They just want to clap back, as the young kids say.
As the young kids say.
But, you know, they just want to clap back, and that's why I refuse to engage online anymore. But I love doing this because I have people on here who I don't agree with at all. And I genuinely do find that when they come here, I see them as a human, you know, like they're a human, and I still don't agree with the overarching message sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, you know, at least I know where you stand.
Yeah.
You know, at least I'm not just triggered by all the nonsense you post online or the people who post about your posting, you know?
Yeah, I kind of view it the same way, where especially when it comes to things regarding wildlife and people love bringing up the topic of like bushmeat and all of that, and it's like, oh, I could curry that, right?
Guyanese could curry anything. I don't love curry that bad where I could eat anything with it.
At this point, some things just don't curry. Just leave it alone. Why we want to? Why? I saw there was this funny interaction. Somebody had shared a video of like an AI generated animal, and one of the comments is, "I could curry it." My brother, listen to me very carefully. No.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like,
Some
I
things
don't
just weren't
even-
meant to be curried
they weren't meant-
or cooked or eaten.
but even then, it's it's an AI video.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't. At this point, I don't even think they mean it when they ask if they could curry it. It's just
Yeah.
one of those things where you got to say it.
I think it's, not to get too deep on that, but this idea of currying any and everything really, to me, is like a little testament of where we have come from as a society. Not necessarily where we are, but just maybe like, the enjoying bushmeat, I guess, is fine. Like I'm not personally a fan,
Neither.
but
Yeah.
does it say something about us that we're willing to like curry
It's one of the
every,
things.
like it
It's
has
one
to
of
be.
the big things when it comes to wildlife education in Guyana. I feel that people have to always bring up or tackle, because there's one thing when you're talking about sustainable harvesting and consumption of wild meat, right? So if you're in a community and this wild meat is their main source of protein, fine, right? Brings us back to a previous segment talking about that, right? You need more flexibility when you're talking about that issue.
Yeah.
When it's for just luxury or recreation and stuff like that, and then you have like these big pots, right? And one pot can got laba, and another pot can got deer, and another pot can got caiman, and then another pot can got bush hog, and all these things, right? And it's like, and then you can invite over probably like 20 people. It kind of, as the conservationist in me, kind of rubs me the wrong way, but I don't like going too deep into these topics because it brings up the inevitable theme of, but that's our culture,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And to tell someone that their culture is wrong, is not fair. But at the same time, I feel like there's a difference between cultural practice and luxury and recreation,
Yes.
and to separate the two is something that we're still playing around with. Where does culture start and where does culture end, right? A caiman for what, one of the summer months, if you just happen to catch it in the back dam and you're like, hey, you invite over your friends, and it's like, oh, let me eat this caiman. Fine. That could be culture, right? 5 caimans stewing in a pot, right? And you invite over your buddies, and, y'all can take 2 beers and thing. And I was like, yeah, look, I catch this caiman. Is that culture?
Yeah.
Some would say yes. Other people would be like, this just bragging and recreation.
That's ghastly. Yeah. Interesting point about the culture and about that argument. And I've tabled this to a number of guests. Would love to hear your perspective if you're interested in giving one. We claim culture on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me because what the things we deem as cultural, does this be culture to do them? Is like, I don't know if that's exact. I don't know if I'd consider that culture. So there's this argument I've sort of tabled from one guest I had who was a Chinese national. Long story short, he was a victim of a human concentration camp. Long story, but the podcast is on it. You could look at it if you want. But we're talking about his Guyanese interactions, and he was speaking about being called a Chinese, and he found that offensive. I had posted a clip on our conversation, and the comment section went wild. And there's just this constant back and forth of, so the minority are saying we shouldn't say that. It does come across as racist because it has some connotation to it. The majority is like, well, does be culture. If he don't like it, he could go back to where he come from. I'm like, my man, do you not see the irony in that statement, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of people think it's just how we call each other in an endearing way, like calling somebody fat man or buck man or whatever. And I again, like you, I can't jump down and stand on this high pedestal and say,
Yeah.
well, this is no,
Wrong.
this is wrong,
Yeah,
because I have used similar terms before. But do we just invalidate someone's personal experience based on culture? And that's the kind of conversation I'm really trying to learn how to bring up in a way that I'm not trying to convert you.
Yeah.
I just want you to maybe think about it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a real tricky one because I have seen those like similar discourse with the same thing.
Yeah.
One that I've always talked about with my friends is this whole red gal thing, red gal gonna break your heart. There's a whole song.
Yeah.
Right? And when you hear somebody say, oh, red girl or whatever, oftentimes it's not within that endearing context.
Yeah.
For red gal in particular, it's within a sexual context.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Same could be said, buckman and Chinese girl, right? I think the only area where there's a little more sensitivity is when you're calling somebody black or Indian, and that's because of that existing racial tension.
You
Right?
think there's sensitivity, as in they're sensitive about being called black or Indian?
They're sensitive about being called not so much black or Indian, but those other
The connotations.
that come with it.
Gotcha.
Right? They understand that immediately.
Yeah.
Right?
But why is that more important than?
Because most of them have experienced racism through that context, right? Or that connotation.
So have the Chinese.
But so
and
have the
Amerindian
Chinese,
people.
right? So it's about what we don't realize is that same frame of thinking that you have towards your own identity and how people refer to you, use it for the same for the Chinese. Use it for the indigenous.
Yeah.
Use that same frame of thinking, because what you'll come to realize is that we're more similar than you think. And we all feel bouts of racism. We all feel discrimination in similar ways. So it's when you really sit down and you think about it in that way, it's not hard to grasp. If you don't like being called dirty coolie or those awful things like that, right? Don't call the man Buckman if you don't want to be called Buckman.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just that sort of thinking or the inability to grasp, again, not to change your whole way of thinking, but the inability to be open to anything that impacts this idea of our culture that you held on to for so long is really a modern day form of mental enslavement. It's just this unchanging kind of thing that's keeping everybody down.
A lot of people just don't like it because, you're just being woke. And you're this and you're being that.
It's not that at all.
It's not that at all. It's just basic human courtesy.
Yeah.
If I don't like when you put your foot on my coffee table, you can take your foot down, right? Use the same frame of thinking. It's not hard.
I tell people it's also like, I just kind of feel like it's insulting to reduce your whole identity to a
one
racial
little
profile.
word. Yeah. Yeah.
To a racial profile that you already have preconceived notions about.
Right. And not only that, you probably have experience with that word that was blatantly in a negative context. And that sticks with you.
Yeah.
So regardless if Susie said is a positive context, you don't see it that way.
Yeah.
And if it comes back to, that peer-on-peer respect. If I say something you're saying is offensive, be a grown-up and stop saying it.
Yeah.
You're right.
For sure.
Right? Personal opinion, fine. If your friend from around the corner don't mind you saying it, say it to your friend from around the corner. Don't say it to me.
Yeah.
So.
Just a couple closing thoughts. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
What do you think, like, moving forward? I know you're at UG now, and I know that this year they've announced free education for all, which to me is a very, I'm all for it, but it's a very, very daring,
it's a big step.
it's a very daring assertion,
Yeah.
if I do say so myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, for, I'm assuming you need a few $1 billion a year to run an institution like UG. Moving forward, I think, like, does that present any potential changes that you can see with regards to how this system will be run? Maybe it's like, in my opinion, I feel like there's going to be a long delay in the onboarding of that idea.
Yeah.
I just don't see, you know what, like, we've thought this through, we have all the money, free UG. Because, again, everybody's for it, and I'm for it. I want people to have free education. But I'm skeptical about the analytics of such a grand decision.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a bunch of people about this because, you know, as soon as it was announced, they were like, "Oh, Arianne, y'all getting free UG now?" And I was like, "Yeah, surprise!" Right? And everybody's like, "Oh, so what does that mean?" Like, well, what's the process? How can I apply? Blah blah blah. And I'm like, I don't know as yet. You know, and I think where the university stands is similar. We're all for free education. We think that it can, well, I shouldn't say we, I think that it can help, especially for marginalized and disenfranchised groups, you to get a tertiary education. You know, building that skill force is what you need, right? How it's going to be executed would have to be a little bit different because when I was talking about this with my dad, he did remind me that, you know, UG used to be free, right? And I was like, yeah, but that was back in the day, right? The world and economy has changed since then. So there are new variables at play here that you'll have to consider when you're talking about free UG, right? Added to that, you have programs that are going to be more targeted or more saturated than other programs. So things like the engineering programs for the oil and gas sector, you know, medicine, law, well, those are the two that are going to be saturated regardless, right? Even down to biology, with the changing world and persons seeing the career paths that they could take, they're gonna be more well informed, and they're gonna have more options at their disposal, and they're gonna want to know more information and apply for different things. So we're anticipating an influx that's going to be double or triple what we are already seeing potentially, right? And what I think needs to happen is there needs to be a proper understanding of how it has worked for other institutions currently, and seeing how best we can translate that for the University of Ghana.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't, and you know, best of luck and God bless whoever's job is to do it, because that's going to be
a big question.
So,
it's a big question.
Yeah.
And I don't expect you to answer, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
That's fine.
I know, and thank you for answering so diplomatically and wonderfully. But I do think it should be like a public discussion. I would love to have a panel on, you know, and without it being like a cuss down how they could do this kind of thing. Because that's not the direction to have the conversation. But it's generally thinking through. I think a conversation itself will provide an answer.
It will.
You know,
and I think UG has the benefit of having so many academics that are well versed in how things work internationally. You know, they've collaborated with so many international universities. So I have full faith that they'll find that medium to make this work, right? But what we need to be very careful of is not overestimating, or I guess underestimating, the current resources that UG has.
I was just about to say.
And putting effort towards either evolving or expanding those resources, because that's going to be integral if you're going to have a higher influx of students coming in, and you will, because, you know, freeness.
If you have a super strain on the system, you may as well have not had free. I mean,
or at least delay it. You know,
right? And I'm thinking there would have to be some. It would, in my mind, I'm thinking there therefore has to be some sort of criteria to get into university.
Well, yeah, the criteria remains.
Okay.
I think they'll have the existing criteria and some evolved
What is the criteria? What is the criteria?
So I could speak for bio, whereby
it's by department.
Yeah, or Faculty of Natural Sciences,
Okay.
where they require passes at CXE between
Okay.
1 to 3,
Okay.
right? In the core topics, especially. So for biology, that would include biology, obviously, English A, English B, maths.
Yeah.
Environmental science helps. If you did CAPE, that's a big plus as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I want to debunk is that free UG doesn't mean no criteria or no standards of entry. Those still remain.
Maybe
because
there's a quota.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But in terms of the requirements upon entry, those remain fixed. So, and I guess that's in an effort to not give the idea that any and everybody can just come to UG. And because realistically speaking, you're going to put such a strain on your resources.
Yeah.
You know, imagine teaching a class of like 600 students. It's
Crazy.
impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some lock-offs or some caps to that. So that's one thing I think needs to just be said, that the criteria for entry would still remain the same. I think.
Either way.
I would. You know.
It's a tomorrow problem.
It's a tomorrow problem, honestly. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like in where I stand personally is I'm all for free UG, but you know, I don't want it to be a case where I am put at a disadvantage, whether it's through the added work or the added, you know, strain and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you know, I also have family. I also have a life
Yeah.
outside of UG. So that, you know, for me personally, that's something that I keep at the back of my head, whilst also understanding that free education is something that should be allowed.
Yeah.
You know?
Definitely. Totally understandable. Arianne, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I, again, thoroughly enjoyed, and you're welcome back anytime. I hope you come back.
Yeah.
This is great. This has been fantastic.
Absolutely. Well,
A lot of fun.
you know how to get on to me. So
All right. Have a good year, man. Thank you.
you too. Thank you.